And welcome back to this Dialogue Web Extra. I'm Marcia Franklin. I'm here with Grover Norquist. He's the founder of Americans for Tax Reform, and he's in Idaho talking about immigration issues. He is in support of legislation that would provide a path to citizenship for the estimated 11 million undocumented people in our country, as well as more visas for foreign-born workers and increased enforcement at the border. So what has changed, do you think? Sure. What's been the tipping point, or some of the tipping points, if you will, between what we saw a few years ago and actually even before that, when Senator Craig from Idaho was working very hard on this issue across party lines? What's changed that there now seems to be kind of a momentum and some coalition building between some relatively odd bedfellows?
Oh, years ago I worked with Senator Craig on just this issue, trying to move forward some particularly farm worker questions on immigration. 2007, President Bush tried to move forward immigration comprehensive reform, and it blew up. Matter of fact, the fellow who walked into the room and killed the bill was Barack Obama, freshman senator, with a little, here's my poison pill amendment that I will be putting in at the request of the AFL-CIO and Senator Reid. So your whole project's dead. And that was it. Now you have Barack Obama as president saying he'd sign a bill that had a guest worker program and so on. The unions for 50 years were dead set against immigration, broader immigration, and now tentatively for pieces of it.
What changed on that piece of it?
On the Democratic Party, it became impossible for them to keep blaming the Republican Party for not having welfare reform, because for 2 years, in 2009, 2010, the Democrats had the House, Senate, and presidency, and they did nothing on welfare reform. They could have passed it like this. They didn't. At some
welfare
point,
reform?
I'm sorry, I said welfare. I meant immigration reform.
Yeah, I'm like,
immigration
whoa.
reform. They could have passed immigration reform. And they chose not to. And so people said, hey, what's going on? So they have to answer to the Hispanic American community. On the Republican conservative side, you had a couple of shifts. One of the various faith communities, now the Roman Catholic Church and the Mormon Church have always been very pro-immigration, pro-immigrant. But this time around, the Southern Baptist Convention, you'd think of as the most conservative church group in the country, one of the largest church group in the country, very supportive of comprehensive immigration reform. The National Association of Evangelicals, parallel to the Southern Baptists, very pro-immigration.
And why is that?
reform.
What's the change there, you think?
They looked over time and basically started reading their Bibles and what the Bible says about the stranger. And they make it very clear that this is a theological imperative for them, a religious imperative. That they understand that it's good for the economy, but that's not why they're doing it. They think this is what they're called to do. Also, they know more Hispanics, because about a third of Hispanics go to Protestant churches these days and are part of, and they're active in the Catholic Church and very active in the Mormon Church. So they're part of these faith communities, and so now everybody knows somebody, in addition to having an understanding. So that's been a huge shift within the Republican Party. The Christian radio network, the Salem Communications Network, the biggest Christian radio network in the country, very pro-immigration reform. Then add to that the business community, which was silent in 2000, when they told me and others this is our top priority, it's the most important. It's not top priority, it's our biggest problem, it's our biggest issue, but they didn't push it. They didn't call on Republican and Democratic
Because it would have meant admitting that they hire undocumented people?
No, they'd never done it before. They didn't know if they were allowed to. You know, it wasn't, they knew how to be for lower taxes, they knew how to be against regulations, they knew how to fight labor unions and trial lawyers, and that's what they'd always done. And all of a sudden there was this new issue that was completely new to them. They weren't even sure they were allowed to participate in the debate. I'm not teasing. I mean, you could see the struggle. 2007, they were on the right side of the issue in terms of supporting immigration reform, but they didn't have the capacity to. This time around, state chambers are taking the lead. The national chamber is taking the lead, both running advertisements and communicating with congressmen and senators.
Because?
Because the business community recognizes that they need this talent. They want to legalize the people who've been here. They want certainty. They don't like being accused of breaking the law when they hire somebody who's not a citizen, but that, you know, what are the alternatives?
And it's a growing market, too, for product, right?
Well, certainly Hispanics and Asian Americans as well. So all of that's going on. You have a business community that wants to see this fixed. You have a religious community that wants to see it fixed. and you have a law enforcement community. That's Bibles, badges, and business. The badges are police. I did an event in Austin, Texas, with the chief of police of Austin, who's an Hispanic American, talking about, I want to be able to arrest bad guys. I don't want to have to be going around bothering people who are walking to work. Okay, and if we're going to fight crime, we need to make illegal the good people so we can fight and be serious about going after bad people, people who break real laws and steal stuff.
There are still people, though, who either oppose the legislation for certain things in it, or they are worried. That we might call them more nativists. You know, they're concerned about the changes in our population. Maybe they push English only, things like that. So it's not as if the anti-immigration people have just dissipated and gone away.
No,
and in fact,
yeah.
they may. They're a combination of those individuals and the people who point at various pieces of legislation could bollocks the situation in the House.
It is still possible to mess up and not get across the finish line. What's interesting is the overwhelming majority in the Senate wants it to pass, even including some people who vote no because they're not quite sure where their constituents are. They hear a ringing in their ear from the radio talk show host.
Yeah.
And you can't get in trouble voting no on a bill that passes because it passed and everybody wanted it's happy. And the critics go, oh, thank you for voting no. So you always kind of, this is Bob Dole's observation, can never get in trouble voting against a bill that passes. Who's going to be mad at you? So there'll be a reduced vote in the Senate from what's really there in terms of the people who want to see it pass. You have something like that in the House, and the question is whether that gets across the finish line. I think it will, because the business community wants it, the communities of faith want it, the law enforcement people want it, all the free market economists certainly understand why it's important. You're right, there are some people, and always have been in the United States, who are scared of the other. The people who didn't want Irish Americans to come, the people who didn't want Chinese Americans to come or Japanese Americans to come, the people who thought the Jews had low IQs and shouldn't be allowed in from Eastern Europe. There's some pretty ugly things said in the 1840s and 50s and 60s and the 1900s and going forward. All of the nasty rhetoric that you hear is so muted compared to our history. The good news is how little there is of that. It's still there, sadly, but it's not working.
You're approaching this as you stump around the country from a fiscal position. This is good for the country economically. Is there something in your own life that also informs you on this issue that makes you passionate about it? You know, you're saying that you don't like to see people talk about the other.
It's part of being an American.
Part of being an American
Yeah.
is to recognize
The importance of immigration. The challenge is other countries don't do it. Other countries don't understand it. We do. Makes us different.
And you are married to a Palestinian woman. Does that help?
She's an immigrant.
She's an immigrant.
She came to my hometown. Yeah.
So does that help inform your thoughts on how we treat what some might view as the other?
Yeah. Actually not, because I was there before.
You were there before you met her. Yeah. It's interesting how when you Google your name, well, of course what comes up first is the pledge, or your name, then the tax pledge. Not very far after that, though, it says Grover Norquist Muslim, Grover Norquist wife. And, you know, all this anathema to the fact that you are married to a Palestinian.
That's sad, but that's just sort of odd duck, folks. I've worked throughout my life, always doing outreach within the Republican Party. We helped get the Bostoner Rebbe, the head Hasidic rabbi in Boston, to endorse Reagan back in '80, which was the first time he'd ever endorsed anyone. And reaching out to that community was very important. I worked the Hispanic community in '80 in Lowell and Lawrence, going to small business to small business. I work out with the Indian American community, South Asian Indian American community. In terms of doing outreach with the Republican Party there, and also with the Muslim American community. So it's just something I've always done.
And it's close to you, I can tell. It's important to you. Rand Paul, who I assume you share views with on other issues, has said this is dead on arrival in the House, and Boehner has said this, I'm not going to violate the Hastert rule, and unless half of my caucus is for it, I'm not even going forward with it. All talk, all rhetoric?
Two things. One, Rand Paul had a proposal on border security he thought was solved all the world's problems and all the legitimate problems that people had. And the challenge, it would have been a sort of an annual vote that, yes, the border is being secured. The concern is that that could be gamed, perhaps, in the future. That's why some people didn't like it. And he felt he had his amendment, which worked, and it didn't go, so he didn't vote for the bill. He has always made it clear he wanted comprehensive immigration reform. He's not one of these guys trying to stop the bill. He was trying to help make the bill work.
Because he's a free market.
Yeah, he's a free market guy. I think his perspective is go to the House and see whether the House might like his approach. There are different ways to do the border. I mean, originally the Gang of Eight had one, then Cornyn had something that was perhaps tougher, and then what they came out with now increases the number of people at the border, and people felt comfortable with that. The Rand Paul approach might be acceptable at some point too by some people. I understand why Rand, again, has been moving to make the bill happen. When they didn't go with his approach, he said, I can't support it at this point. He would like to see his approach taken perhaps in the House. So, and Boehner's position, I think Boehner would clearly like to see comprehensive pass. But you'd never say to the Republicans in the House, well, the guys in the Senate passed something, let's just swallow it. You know, even if both houses are run by the same party, the House doesn't defer to the Senate and vice versa. So the House is going to take the Senate bill, touch it, poke it, fiddle with it, maybe even come up with something completely different and then mush the two together.
So throughout this Web Extra conversation and in the main program, you've been talking about the value of compromise on an issue like this. You're going to win some, you're going to lose some. Maybe on E-Verify you're not as comfortable. Some people aren't as comfortable on the border issue, whatever. Yeah. But you're known as kind of a 100% guy on the tax issue. It's black and it's white. Yeah. So I think people are still kind of
circle.
Yeah. Some people are still scratching their heads, like, okay, is this the same guy who's, you know, been called the dark wizard of
of the anti-tax cult.
Right, anti-tax cult. And, you know, all of a sudden he's you know, working across the table and compromising.
Oh, well, two things. I work across with Democrats all the time on liberty issues, and that's the difference. Like Guantanamo,
for instance.
And the whole questions of ID, a national ID card. I used to work regularly with all the left, ACLU, and Phyllis Schlafly used to be part of it. Until she decided she was more anti-immigrant than she was anti-ID card, and stopped being part of the coalition. But here's the point: always willing to compromise on the road to liberty. So this bill makes us freer at every level. Makes the border more secure. It allows people who are here to live in peace and not in the shadows. It makes us wealthier, more successful economically, gives people more options, brings more people into the country, and makes freedom stronger. Okay, I would argue, gee, I like this better than that, or I like more of this and less of that. But it's all a question of how far you're moving in the right direction.
And that you're confident that this will not, in the end, result in higher taxes in order to pay for a large bureaucracy.
Yes.
You remain confident that, you know, despite the Heritage Foundation and other conservatives, that this will not result in higher taxes, but instead result in higher revenue.
Yes, higher revenue, not higher taxes, because more people are working. Holtz-Eakin, former head of the Congressional Budget Office, estimates it'll increase revenues, not taxes, but revenues, $2.7 trillion over a decade.
Although if the CBO was for something you didn't like, would you?
Well, he's a free market economist who used to run the CBO.
Right.
The CBO itself did an analysis of not the next 10 years. Almost everything's a 10-year window. They did 20 years, and said this is a net revenue increaser as more people work and work.
And the Heritage Foundation Rector did his own study and looked out 50 years and said, you know,
Right.
there's
But
going to be more burden on our society from all these people.
right. There hasn't been in the history of studies a more discredited study. Every free market group in Washington, D.C. has looked at that and said, among other things, it's not a study of the bill. It's a study of an imaginary bill that they don't like. Okay? Half of the costs in that bill are sunk costs, things that we're going to have to pay anyway. So it really is an embarrassment. So I'm not too worried about the bill that failed, because AEI and Hudson and Cato and every free market group has looked at that and explained why it's flawed and put out their own analysis that what's being discussed in the Gang of Eights, now the Senate's proposal, will be good for the economy and good for taxpayers as well.
I would be remiss if I did not ask you about the tax pledge, about the landscape, the fiscal landscape that we're in right now. You know, there have been a lot of political watchers saying, you know, people are starting to defect from the pledge. Bob Corker, Peter King, Eric Cantor has talked about it, Lindsey Graham, that years from now, people will not hold to this pledge, and that you've joked about it and said, oh, they're just having impure thoughts. They're not really going to follow through. But there are many people, Senator Alan Simpson from Wyoming being one of them, who feel that former Senator Alan Simpson, retired Senator Alan Simpson, still very involved in the issues, though, that feel it's a gimmick and that it's stalling progress, bipartisan progress on solving our country's fiscal problems. That it's just people shouldn't be beholden to it.
Okay. Here's the good news. Somebody could have thought that 3 years ago. You could say, I don't know, maybe we have to raise taxes in order to get a budget reduction deal. And some people thought that. Coburn, who took the pledge when he ran for office and promised people of Oklahoma, I'll never raise your taxes, wrote a public letter to me, but a public letter as he went into the negotiations for the Gang of Six and said, I'll never vote for a tax increase. Never. Won't happen. And then got sucked into imagining tax increases that he might be for. And told me at the time, he said, you know, I hope you're right that we can cut the budget without raising taxes, but I don't think we can do that. But I hope you're right. Well, good news is, in 2011, we got $2.5 trillion reduction in the deficit, $2.5 trillion reduction in spending. In law, not one of these phony spending cuts. There's a cap on spending, and then there's a sequester to bring the cap down. $2.5 trillion, not a dollar of tax increase. And not to say I told you so. However, I told them. Okay, I said if you have tax increases on the table, as in 82 and 90, you'll have tax increases and not see a penny of spending cuts. That's what happened before. If you insist no tax increase, you can get spending cuts. So we were right. That's exactly what happened. And we now know if you put a tax increase inside a budget deal, like putting a piranha in a goldfish bowl, you end up with no goldfish. If you put a tax increase in with spending cuts, the spending cuts get eaten up.
Well, you've got folks like Senator Crapo and Representative Mike Simpson from Idaho coming to the table saying, you know, in negotiations, some extra revenue should be on the table.
Okay, except we had the negotiation. We won. We don't ever have to talk to the president again, as long as he's president, on spending questions.
Well, you're talking about the immediate situation, right?
10
but
years. 10 years. Okay. Now, the second part of that is there is a budget deal that is written down, not one of these imaginary budget deals. It's called the Ryan Plan, and it takes spending. In the present situation, if we go with Obama's game plan, we end up with 40% of GDP swallowed by the federal government. If we pass 2050, we go to the Ryan plan, it's down to 16.5%.
So that's the future to you.
The Ryan plan is accepted by all the Republicans. We have a Republican president and a Republican Senate. You pass the Ryan plan, solves all the problems. Don't have to raise taxes, reforms welfare. It's not as if we don't have a written down budget plan to handle this. We do. We just don't have enough Republicans in the Senate. We don't have a Republican in the White House. So the good news for limited government people is that the pledge is held. We stopped them from raising taxes instead of cutting the budget. We got the budget cuts. Now we just hold the sequester, and in 2016 or 2020, get a Republican House, Senate president, solve the world's problems.
Nice, neat little package.
Yeah.
And you're raising,
and then Simpson can
and you're
send me a
raising a
thank you note.
5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and we'll see,
Absolutely.
they can unravel
Yeah.
things. Nice talking with you.
Good to talk to you.
And have a safe trip. Thank you
Shalom.
very much. Yeah. You've been listening to Grover Norquist. He is the head of Americans for Tax Reform in Idaho to talk about immigration issues. Stopped in to do this show and also this Web Extra. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Marcia Franklin.